Most Elvis fans who are old enough to remember know exactly where they were on August 16th, 1977, the day the world learned the king of rock and roll had.
They said he was gone forever. The king of rock and roll laid to rest as millions wept. But decades later, strange clues refused to stay buried. The body didn't match. The records don't add up. And witnesses keep swearing they've seen him. Older, quieter, but unmistakably Elvis. Could it all have been a grand illusion? From secret flights to hidden letters and eerie recordings, new revelations are shaking everything we thought we knew. Brace yourself. These 5 mind-blowing facts might finally prove that Elvis Presley didn't die. He simply walked away from the spotlight. Number 5. The body that wasn't Elvis. The doors to the autopsy room closed on August 16, 1977, and with them, the truth seemed to disappear forever. Medical officials sealed the report immediately, locking away every detail about what they found on that examination table. The documents went into a vault where they would stay hidden for 50 years. 50 years of silence. 50 years of questions that nobody in power wanted to answer. Why would they hide the autopsy of the most famous entertainer in the world? What secrets lay written on those forbidden pages? Dr. Jerry Francisco faced the press and spoke words that sounded rehearsed, mechanical. He declared heart failure as the cause of death. His statement was brief, his manner hurried. He refused to take questions about specific findings. When reporters pushed for details, he simply walked away from the microphones. The medical examiner, who had performed countless autopsies, suddenly acted like a man guarding nuclear codes. His nervousness showed in every gesture, every clipped response. Inside the morgue, nurses and assistants saw things that made their blood run cold. The body lying under the harsh lights didn't match the medical records sitting on the nearby desk. Elvis Presley's file clearly stated he had blue eyes, bright and piercing like chips of ice. The corpse staring upward had brown eyes, dark and muddy. Eye color doesn't change after death. It remains fixed, permanent, a marker of identity that stays constant from birth to grave. The medical assistant's hands trembled as she clutched the patient's chart, her eyes darting between the file and the figure on the bed. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The details on the record didn't match what she was seeing. She'd checked 3 times already, but the truth refused to change. Those weren't his eyes. The scar problem proved even more disturbing. Elvis had fallen from a slide as a child, leaving a distinctive mark near his eye that fans could spot in close-up photographs. He'd undergone several surgeries throughout his life, each one leaving its permanent signature on his skin. Medical records documented every mark, every line, every trace of surgical intervention. The body on the table showed smooth, unmarked skin where those scars should have been. Flesh doesn't heal itself after death. Scars don't vanish into thin air. Forensic experts who later examined funeral photographs couldn't explain what they saw. One pathologist from New York studied the images for hours, comparing them to known pictures of Elvis from medical examinations. Years later, during an interview with a documentary crew, he shook his head in disbelief as he recalled the moment. Scars, he explained, were permanent, unique marks that told a person's story, as distinct as fingerprints. They didn't just vanish, unless, of course, you were looking at someone entirely different. The funeral at Graceland drew thousands of mourners, but those who got close to the open casket left with strange feelings they couldn't shake. The face in the coffin looked wrong somehow. The skin had an artificial quality, smooth and waxy like a department store mannequin. Light reflected off the surface in unnatural ways. Real skin, even dead skin, absorbs and diffuses light. This face seemed to bounce light back like polished plastic. Martha Williams stood in line for 3 hours to pay her respects. She'd seen Elvis perform live 12 times, close enough to notice the small details of his features. When she finally reached the coffin, a wave of dread tightened her chest. Her eyes scanned the face inside and her stomach lurched in protest. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. She knew that face, had studied it for years, memorized every line and curve, but this wasn't it. The man lying there wasn't Elvis Presley. Security guards moved quickly to usher her away, but her words rippled through the crowd like electricity. Other mourners began voicing similar doubts. An elderly woman fainted after viewing the body, claiming she'd seen something evil in that coffin. A young man broke down crying, insisting they were all being lied to. The atmosphere shifted from grief to confusion, from sadness to suspicion. Vernon Presley moved through the viewing like a man in a trance. His behavior struck everyone as odd, detached, wrong for a father who just lost his only son. He didn't weep. He didn't collapse in despair. Instead, he approached the coffin with what looked like satisfaction on his weathered face. Several people standing nearby heard him lean down and whisper to the body. His voice was low, almost a murmur, but it carried just enough to reach those who were listening closely. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken meaning, before he finally said the words that seemed to settle everything. "You did it, son." Those 4 words made no sense. Why would a grieving father congratulate a corpse? What achievement could death possibly represent? The phrase suggested success, completion, victory. It sounded like something you'd say after a difficult task had been accomplished, not after your child had passed away. The pallbearers provided another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. These men carried the copper coffin down the Graceland steps with surprising ease. Elvis had weighed over 200 pounds at his death. A copper casket weighs hundreds of pounds on its own. Together, the burden should have required serious effort, visible strain, and careful coordination. Instead, the pallbearers moved almost casually, as if carrying something far lighter than expected. Joe Henderson, one of the pallbearers, later admitted to a close friend that something felt off. Over drinks one night, he spoke softly, his voice edged with unease. Everyone had noticed it, he admitted, though no one dared speak up back then. The coffin had been far too light, unnaturally easy to lift, like it held something other than a full-grown man. And the silence that followed said everything they'd all been thinking. The body itself became the subject of intense speculation. People who viewed it described the texture as wrong, artificial, constructed. One witness later told a reporter it didn't look real at all. The skin had a strange sheen, the texture all wrong, like plastic. It was as if someone had crafted an impressive wax figure close enough to fool most people, but not quite perfect when you looked long enough. Something about it just felt off. The face looked like Elvis, but only in the way a photograph looks like a person. The spark was missing. The essence was gone. Not just because of death, but because something fundamental wasn't right. If that wasn't Elvis in the coffin, then where was the real king? Number 4, the secret flight out of Memphis. The night sky over Memphis held more than stars on August 16, 1977. While crowds gathered outside Graceland and reporters scrambled to cover the breaking news of Elvis Presley's death, something unusual happened at a small private airfield on the outskirts of town. A chartered plane sat on the runway with its engines warming up, ready for immediate departure. No flight plan had been filed. No destination appeared in any official records. The aircraft simply waited in the darkness like a getaway car outside a bank robbery. Captain James Mitchell had flown private charters for 15 years without incident. He knew how to keep his mouth shut and his questions to himself. Rich people paid for discretion as much as they paid for the flight itself. But this particular evening felt different from the moment he received the emergency booking. The call came through at 7:30 in the evening, just as news stations began reporting the death at Graceland. Someone needed immediate transport out of Memphis, no questions asked, cash payment only. The passenger arrived in an unmarked black car that pulled directly onto the tarmac. Airport security seemed to vanish at exactly the right moment, allowing the vehicle to bypass all normal checkpoints and procedures. A tall figure emerged from the back seat wearing dark sunglasses despite the late hour. A baseball cap sat low on his head, and a jacket collar turned up high around his neck. Every visible element of the outfit seemed designed to hide rather than reveal. Mitchell watched the man climb the stairs into the plane. The passenger moved with a familiar grace, a certain way of carrying himself that triggered recognition in the pilot's memory. Something about the walk, the posture, the build struck Mitchell as deeply familiar. When the man settled into his seat and finally spoke, his voice carried a distinctive southern drawl that made the pilot's hands freeze on the controls. The passenger gave his name as John Burroughs. That name meant nothing to most people, but Mitchell had read enough tabloid magazines to know it represented Elvis Presley's most commonly used alias. The king had checked into hotels under that name, rented cars with that identity, lived whole separate days as John Burroughs when Elvis Presley became too heavy a burden to carry. The plane lifted off into the darkness and flew south. Mitchell never learned the final destination because his passenger demanded they land at a small airstrip in Mississippi after only 40 minutes of flight time. Another unmarked car waited there on the ground. The man calling himself John Burroughs departed without a word of thanks or farewell. He simply disappeared into the vehicle, which drove away into the rural darkness where streetlights didn't reach and cameras didn't exist. Mitchell tried to file his flight report the next morning according to standard procedure. He discovered that the airport logs from the previous night had been wiped clean. His flight didn't exist in any computer system. The booking had vanished from the charter company's records. Even his own handwritten notes from the control tower had disappeared from the logbook. Someone with serious power had erased every trace of that midnight departure. Years later, when Mitchell finally spoke about that night, his voice shook with the weight of the secret he'd carried. He described the passenger's mannerisms, the way he thanked the flight attendant with a slight nod, the distinctive hand gestures that belonged to only one man in the world. Mitchell remained convinced until his dying day that he had flown Elvis Presley out of Memphis on the very night the world believed the king had passed away. The FBI connection added another layer of complexity to the mystery. Declassified documents from the 1970s revealed that the Bureau had recruited several high-profile celebrities as informants during their war against organized crime. These famous individuals could move through elite social circles where regular agents couldn't penetrate. They attended parties with mob bosses, performed at venues controlled by criminal enterprises, and gathered intelligence while hiding behind their celebrity status. One particular file mentioned an unnamed entertainer asset who had provided valuable information about the selling of illegal substances and money laundering operations in Las Vegas. The casinos where this performer regularly appeared served as fronts for organized crime families. The entertainer's cooperation had led to several major arrests and indictments, but the file noted growing concern for the asset's safety as the criminal networks began suspecting a leak from within their trusted circle. The document described a contingency plan for extracting the asset if his cover became compromised. Witness protection protocols would activate immediately. A staged death would provide the perfect exit strategy, allowing the informant to vanish completely while his enemies believed he was safely buried in the ground. The file referenced extensive planning for this potential operation, including cooperation from local medical examiners, funeral directors, and airport authorities. Federal agents had perfected the art of faking deaths for witnesses who knew too much. They'd done it dozens of times before for lesser-known individuals. The process involved careful coordination, falsified documents, cooperative officials, and most importantly, a body double to take the place of the person disappearing into a new life. For someone as famous as Elvis Presley, the operation would require unprecedented levels of planning and resources, but the government had both in abundance when protecting valuable assets. The timing aligned too perfectly to ignore. Elvis had spent years performing in Las Vegas, the mob's playground. He'd rubbed shoulders with connected individuals, seen things that honest citizens weren't supposed to witness. If he'd agreed to share information with federal authorities, he would have become a marked man the moment the crime families discovered his betrayal. No amount of fame could protect him from that kind of retribution. Faking his death solved multiple problems simultaneously. It removed him from danger, protected his family from retaliation, and gave the FBI a clean exit for an asset who had outlived his usefulness. The government could walk away claiming victory in their fight against organized crime, while Elvis Presley quietly became someone else in some small town where nobody would think to look for a dead rock star. The king may have traded his crown for a new identity, and the government might have helped him do it. But how could anyone explain the countless people who swore they saw someone who looked just like Elvis even after his death? Number 3. The sightings they couldn't explain. Louise Welling walked into a small bakery in Kalamazoo, Michigan, on a Tuesday morning in 1988, expecting nothing more than her usual coffee and pastry. What she encountered instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. A tall man stood at the counter ordering donuts, his back turned toward the entrance. Something about his posture caught her attention immediately. The way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other carried a rhythm she recognized from countless concert films and television appearances. When the man turned around, Louise felt her knees go weak. The face belonged to Elvis Presley, older and heavier than his last public appearances, but unmistakably him. The same distinctive jawline, the same unusual lip curve, the same intense eyes that had captivated millions. He wore simple clothes, nothing flashy or attention-seeking. A plain jacket, regular jeans, scuffed boots that looked well worn. He carried himself like someone trying desperately to blend into normalcy. Louise stood frozen as the man walked past her toward the exit. His cologne left a trail in the air, a scent she remembered from standing near the stage at a concert in Detroit years earlier. That specific fragrance had been custom-made for Elvis, something she'd read about in fan magazines. The combination of shock and recognition left her speechless until he'd already disappeared through the door and climbed into a waiting pickup truck. Police dismissed her report within minutes of filing it. The officer taking her statement didn't even bother writing down all the details. He'd heard these stories before, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. Every small town seemed to have someone claiming they'd spotted the dead king buying groceries or pumping gas. The authorities treated Elvis sightings like UFO reports, entertaining stories from delusional people with overactive imaginations. But Louise remained unshaken in her conviction. She'd seen Elvis Presley perform live 3 times during the 1970s. She'd studied his face, memorized his movements, collected photographs and posters that covered her bedroom walls. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity or wishful thinking. The man in that bakery possessed mannerisms that couldn't be faked or duplicated. The way he tilted his head slightly when listening to the cashier, the distinctive hand gesture he made while counting his change, the subtle lip curl that appeared when he smiled. Similar reports flooded in from across the country throughout the 1980s and 90s. A gas station attendant in Oklahoma insisted Elvis had filled up a Ford sedan at his station, paying with exact change and leaving quickly when recognition flickered in the attendant's eyes. A waitress in North Carolina described serving breakfast to a man who ordered the exact meal Elvis was famous for preferring, prepared in the specific way he'd always requested it. The photographs presented even more compelling evidence. A grainy image surfaced, showing an older man standing near the gates of Graceland during a candlelight vigil. Fans had gathered to commemorate the anniversary of Elvis's death, and there among the mourners stood someone who looked remarkably like an aged version of the king himself. The figure wore sunglasses and a hat, but the facial structure visible beneath the disguise matched Elvis's bone structure with unsettling accuracy. Another photograph captured a man at a gas station in Arkansas who bore an incredible resemblance to what Elvis might look like after decades of aging. Facial recognition experts examined the image with sophisticated software. Some declared it a clever forgery, pointing to inconsistencies in lighting and shadow patterns. Others argued that the bone structure, ear shape, and distinctive features aligned too perfectly with Elvis's known characteristics to be coincidental or manufactured. Video footage from a Memphis grocery store in 1994 created the biggest sensation. Security cameras captured a man moving through the aisles with Elvis's exact walking pattern, that distinctive swaying gait that movement analysts had studied and documented. The figure's hands displayed the same unusual finger positioning that Elvis exhibited throughout his career. When the man reached for items on high shelves, His arm extension matched the precise angles and movements that kinesiologists had recorded during Elvis's performances. The debate split experts down the middle. Digital forensics specialists insisted modern technology could create convincing fakes of anyone, living or dead. They pointed to editing software, deepfake capabilities, and the human tendency to see what we want to see in ambiguous images. But facial structure analysts countered with measurements and proportions that couldn't easily be replicated without sophisticated knowledge of Elvis's unique anatomical features. The emotional testimony from witnesses carried its own powerful weight. These weren't casual observers or attention seekers. Many were lifelong fans who'd spent decades studying every detail of Elvis's appearance and behavior. They described encounters with absolute certainty, refusing to back down even when ridiculed or dismissed. Their convictions stemmed from recognizing something deeper than surface appearance, something in the essence of the person they'd encountered. If Elvis wanted to disappear, he couldn't stop being seen. Now let's take a look at the hidden hint Elvis left behind in his music. Number 2. Hidden messages in his music and letters. The recording studio felt different during those final sessions in June of 1977. Engineers noticed Elvis seemed distracted, distant, like a man already halfway gone from the world around him. He moved through the songs with unusual intensity, pouring emotion into every note as if each recording might be his last chance to speak. The music carried weight that went beyond mere entertainment. Something deeper lurked beneath the melodies, hidden meanings that only became clear after he vanished from the world forever. Way Down became one of his final recorded songs, and the lyrics struck listeners as strange even before his death. The words described descending, falling, moving away from everything familiar. Fans later analyzed every line, searching for hidden meanings in phrases that seemed to predict departure rather than simple heartbreak. The song climbed the charts after his death, reaching number 1 while people wondered if they'd missed obvious clues hidden in plain sight. Studio musicians remembered Elvis insisting on specific vocal inflections, emphasizing certain words as if trying to communicate something beyond the surface meaning. Recording engineers spoke quietly among themselves about unusual sessions that happened after regular hours. Elvis would arrive late at night with only his most trusted inner circle, recording material that never appeared on any official release schedule. These mysterious tracks vanished into private vaults, their existence denied by record label executives who claimed no such recordings existed. But the engineers knew what they'd heard: songs that sounded like farewell letters set to music, performances that carried the weight of permanent goodbye rather than temporary absence. The technical crew noticed Elvis seemed to be creating a musical time capsule, recording enough material to last for years of posthumous releases. He worked with focused determination during those final months, as if racing against a deadline only he could see. The songs ranged from gospel hymns about finding peace to ballads about leaving everything behind for a simpler existence. Each track felt like another piece of a puzzle that wouldn't be solved until long after he'd gone. Handwritten letters began surfacing in the 1990s, more than a decade after Elvis's official death. These documents appeared in unexpected places, sold at small estate sales or discovered in storage units purchased by ordinary people. The handwriting matched Elvis's distinctive style with eerie precision. Forensic document examiners studied the pen pressure, letter formation, and unique quirks that made his writing instantly recognizable. Some declared the letters authentic beyond reasonable doubt. The content of these mysterious letters described a quiet life far removed from fame and spotlight. One letter mentioned missing the energy of performing but finding unexpected joy in peaceful anonymity. Another described watching sunsets without bodyguards or photographers, simple pleasures that had been impossible during years of constant public scrutiny. The writer spoke about trading everything for freedom, choosing invisibility over immortality. Multiple envelopes bore the initials JB in the return address corner. Those 2 letters meant nothing to casual observers but carried enormous significance for anyone familiar with Elvis's secret identity. John Burroughs had been his favorite alias for decades, the name he used when checking into hotels or renting cars. The appearance of those initials on letters supposedly written years after his death suggested either an elaborate hoax or something far more unsettling. One particular letter described the difficulty of watching the world mourn someone who wasn't actually gone. The writer expressed guilt over causing pain to fans and family, but insisted the decision had been necessary for survival. The tone carried regret mixed with relief, sadness blended with liberation. Reading between the lines, the message suggested witness protection or escape from unbearable circumstances rather than simple desire for privacy. Collectors who owned these letters refused to submit them for comprehensive testing that might prove or disprove their authenticity. Some claimed to fear legal consequences if the letters turned out to be genuine. Others worried that definitive proof would destroy the mystery that made the documents valuable. The letters remained in a strange limbo between evidence and fantasy, too real to dismiss, but too convenient to fully believe. Music experts continued finding unusual patterns in Elvis's final recordings. Certain songs contained phrases that seemed to reference new beginnings rather than endings. Others included subtle hints about transformation, rebirth, becoming someone new. The arrangements sometimes featured musical quotes from songs about journeys, departures, and fresh starts. These elements could be coincidental, or they could represent deliberate breadcrumbs left for those paying close enough attention. Maybe Elvis didn't say goodbye. Maybe he just said goodnight. Could this be why no one was allowed into Elvis's room after he passed away? Number 1. The Man in Graceland's Garden. A white-haired man appeared at Graceland during the late 1980s, quietly tending the famous estate's sprawling gardens. Staff members knew him simply as Bill, though nobody could recall exactly when he'd started working there or where he'd come from originally. He moved through the grounds with familiar ease, pruning roses and maintaining flower beds, as if he'd known every inch of the property for his entire life. His presence became part of the landscape, unremarkable to employees but deeply unsettling to certain observant visitors. Tour groups sometimes spotted Bill working near the meditation garden where Elvis's grave marker stood, surrounded by eternal flames and fresh flowers. Something about his appearance stopped people in their tracks. The shape of his face carried echoes of the young Elvis despite wrinkles and white hair. His profile looked hauntingly similar to what aging software might predict for someone born in 1935. When he moved, his body held that distinctive posture everyone recognized from old concert films and television appearances. Sharp-eyed fans began noticing details that seemed too specific to be coincidental. Bill's hands showed the same unusual finger positioning that Elvis had displayed throughout his performing career. His walk contained that characteristic sway, the hip movement that had made him famous decades earlier. Even the way he tilted his head while examining plants matched gestures burned into the collective memory of millions who'd watched the king perform. One particular video clip captured something extraordinary during a standard tour in 1992. A visitor with a camera happened to film Bill trimming hedges near the mansion's entrance. Someone called out asking whether he'd personally known Elvis during the glory years. The groundskeeper stopped working, turned toward the camera, and delivered a statement that ignited worldwide speculation. He said the king continued living but existed in ways people could no longer recognize. His smile carried that famous curl before he disappeared behind the building. The DNA situation surrounding Elvis's burial created additional layers of confusion and doubt. Official records spelled his middle name two different ways across various documents. Some papers listed him as Elvis Aaron Presley, while others showed Elvis Aaron Presley. The grave marker at Graceland used one spelling, but birth certificates and legal documents contradicted that version. Such fundamental inconsistency raised serious questions about whether proper identification had occurred during the burial process. Researchers and documentary producers repeatedly requested permission to conduct DNA testing on the grave contents. The Presley estate rejected every single request without exception. Their lawyers cited family privacy and respect for the deceased as justification for the denials. But these refusals only amplified suspicions among people who believed the death had been staged. Simple DNA analysis could instantly resolve decades of speculation, yet those controlling the estate seemed determined to prevent any scientific examination. Graceland's tour restrictions added fuel to conspiracy theories that refused to die. Visitors could explore the ground floor and see Elvis's famous jungle room, his television collection, and his gold records. But the entire second floor remained permanently sealed from public access. Tour guides often said the upper floor of Graceland remained untouched, preserved exactly as Elvis had left it, a sacred space reserved only for family. Few questioned this publicly, yet whispers persisted about what might lie beyond those locked doors. The mansion's unusual design fueled even more curiosity. Elvis had added multiple staircases, hidden corridors, and private routes that connected parts of the house no visitor ever saw. Some sections led quietly between rooms, cleverly disguised behind walls and furniture. Anyone who knew these secret paths could move through the mansion without ever being noticed by the crowds below. To many, Graceland began to feel less like a tourist attraction and more like a living maze built for privacy. Every locked door, every silent hallway seemed to hold a story of its own. Perhaps Graceland isn't just a memorial. Perhaps it's a place still keeping its greatest secret. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.